In every corner of Africa, stories breathe, tales buried in dust, whispered through firelight. You're about to hear one of them. Welcome to African Horror Stories. Comoros Folklore, the guardian of the Baobab. In the Comoros Islands, the earth is not a dead thing of stone and soil. It is a living, breathing tapestry of spirits known as the Vandru, the hidden neighbors who were here long before the first outrigger canoes touched the white sands of Moheli or the black basalt of Nagitsja. To the people of the islands, nature is a contract. You take a fish, you thank the sea. You pick a vanilla bean, you respect the vine. But there are places where the contract is written in blood and ancient law. There are places where the Vandru do not merely watch, they possess. At the jagged edge of the Mitsamiouli forest, where the slopes of Mount Karthala begin their slow, treacherous climb toward the clouds, there stands the Witness. It is a baobab of such impossible scale that the locals say it was planted by the first Jinn King to mark the boundary between the world of men and the world of shadows. Its trunk is a scarred gray fortress, wide enough to house 12 men, and its branches are not like those of other trees. They do not reach for the sun. They twist and coil downward like the reaching fingers of a giant buried upside down, trying to claw its way back to the surface. Salim grew up in the shadow of this tree, but he never felt its weight. While other children whispered to the leaves, Salim was busy dismantling clockworks and dreaming of the concrete jungles he saw in smuggled French magazines. He was a child of the archipelago, born to the smell of ylang-ylang and cloves, but his soul was forged in the heat of a different fire. By the time he was 20, he had secured a scholarship to study civil engineering in Lyon. In Europe, he learned that the world was something to be measured, graded, and paved. He learned about the tensile strength of steel and the curing time of high-grade cement. When he returned to Nagitsja 10 years later, he wore polished leather shoes that clicked against the volcanic stone, a sound that felt like an insult to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the island. He was no longer a son of the soil. He was a representative of the Grand Comore Development Initiative. The problem with this country, Salim would tell his colleagues over espresso in Moroni, is that we are afraid of our own shadows. We treat the forest like a church when we should treat it like a quarry. We have the finest vanilla and cloves in the world, and they rot on the hillside because the only way to get them down is on the backs of donkeys. We need a highway. We need a spine of asphalt. The project was his masterpiece, a 4-lane passage that would cut through the Mitsamiouli forest, bypassing the treacherous coastal roads. It was a billion-franc dream, and the Witness stood exactly at the center of the survey maps. Old man Bakari, the village's oldest memory keeper, spent his life warning the youth of the taboo. He spoke of the guardian, a spirit that lived not in the branches, but in the very marrow of the wood. Bakari was a man whose skin looked like the very bark he protected, wrinkled and gray, his eyes milky with cataracts, but seeing things that the young and healthy could not. Salim, Bakari said, stopping the young man near the well. The old man's hand was like a claw on Salim's linen sleeve. The baobab is a collector. It does not eat fruit or rain. It eats time.
It eats memories. It is the witness because it has seen every birth and every burial since the Jinn King retreated to the volcano. If you wound it, it will fill the gap in its soul with yours." Salim sighed, checking his gold watch. "Bakari, I respect the traditions, truly, but the witness is a botanical anomaly, nothing more. Its root system is actually threatening the stability of the slope. If we don't remove it, a mudslide could take half the village in the next monsoon. I'm saving lives, not destroying spirits." "You are measuring the depth of the ocean with a ruler," Bakari hissed. "You think because you cannot see the spirit cannot see you. The tree is not in the path of your road. Your road is in the path of the tree's patience." Salim laughed, a bright metallic sound. "Then the tree has had enough time. Tomorrow we mark the clearing zone." The day Salim decided to mark the tree, the air in the village turned stagnant. The humidity was a physical weight, smelling of overripe clothes and the metallic tang of volcanic dust. The wind, which usually danced off the Indian Ocean to cool the hills, had died completely. As he approached the grove alone, his crew having made various excuses about broken equipment and sudden illnesses, the usual cacophony of the tropical forest fell into a sudden, unnatural silence. Usually, the Mitsamiouli forest was a riot of sound, the shrieking of lemurs, the incessant chatter of the bulbuls, and the rustle of giant fruit bats were the background radiation of life. But as Salim crossed the invisible line into the Guardian's territory, the silence became a pressure in his ears. He carried a heavy iron axe, its head polished to a mirror sheen. He didn't need to use it. He had a spray can of neon orange industrial paint in his pocket. But something primal in him wanted to feel the resistance of the wood. He wanted to prove that it was just matter. He stood before the witness. Up close, the tree was a world unto itself. Its bark was thick with moss, orchids, and parasitic vines that looked like tangled veins. For a moment, his hand trembled. He looked up into the canopy and felt a sudden bout of vertigo. The branches seemed to be shifting, coiling like the legs of a massive wooden spider. The sun was blocked out entirely, leaving him in a greenish, underwater gloom. He shook off the feeling, planted his feet, and swung. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp, clean crack of metal on wood. It was a dull, wet thud, the sound of a blade entering heavy muscle. He pulled the axe back and gasped. The wood didn't splinter. Instead, a thick, viscous resin began to weep from the gash. It was the color of a bruised plum, almost black, and it smelled of salt and ancient decay. As the liquid hit the volcanic soil, it didn't soak in. It curled and writhed like a living thing. "Just sap," Salim whispered, though his heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "High mineral content, volcanic soil." He carved a jagged X into the bark, a death warrant for the tree. As he finished the second stroke, a low vibration hummed through the handle of the axe. It was a sound below the range of hearing, a tectonic thud that he felt in his teeth. He turned to leave, but the forest had changed. The path he had walked in on was obscured by a sudden, thick growth of ferns. He felt eyes on his back, thousands of eyes hidden in the knots and burls of the ancient timber. He didn't look back. He ran.
That night, the fever took hold. Salim lay in his modern house, the air conditioning humming at full blast, yet he felt as if his blood were boiling. He went to the sink to wash his hands, but the black resin wouldn't come off. He scrubbed until his skin was raw, but the plum-colored stain had migrated beneath the surface. It was mapping itself along his veins, turning them dark and rigid. He looked into the mirror and recoiled. His eyes, usually a sharp, intelligent brown, were flecked with gray. His skin felt tight, losing its elasticity. When he touched his forearm, it didn't feel like flesh, it felt like weathered cork. He tried to call his lead foreman, but his fingers wouldn't move. They were becoming long, stiff, and knobby. He looked down at his feet and saw with mounting horror that his toes had fused together, the skin thickening into a gray, calloused mass. He tried to scream, but no sound came out, only a fine puff of gray sawdust that coated the bathroom floor. Sleep was no longer possible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the root system of the witness extending miles beneath the island, tapping into the molten heart of the volcano. He felt the thirst. It was a terrible, parching agony. He drank gallon after gallon of water, but it did nothing. He didn't want water from a tap. He wanted the mineral-heavy, silt-thick runoff of the mountain. He wanted to taste the earth. By midnight, the transformation turned violent. His ribs began to creak and shift, expanding to accommodate a thickening core. His spine felt like it was being replaced by a rod of ironwood. He could feel his memories, his time in Lyon, his maps, his ambitions being pulled out of his brain like silk threads. The tree was collecting. It was filling its hollows with the data of his life. Driven by a primal, terrifying instinct, Salim stumbled out into the moonlight. He could no longer walk in the traditional sense. He dragged his heavy, stiffening limbs through the village. The dogs didn't bark at him, they whimpered and fled. He was no longer a man, he was a walking breach of the natural law. He didn't head for the village center or the doctor, he went toward the forest. Each step was an agony of cracking joints and tearing skin. He reached the grove just as the moon reached its zenith. The witness was waiting. The villagers who looked toward the forest that night say the mountain groaned. They say the great Baobab opened a seam in its side, a vertical hollow that glowed with a sickly pale light. It was the color of phosphorus and old bones. Salim reached the tree. His hands, now nothing more than gnarled branches, reached out to touch the X he had carved. The tree didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like home. It felt like the only place in the world where a thing like him could exist. He stepped into the hollow. The wood was soft like velvet and warm as a summer evening. As he entered, the resin began to flow from the ceiling of the hollow, coating him in a protective amber-like shell. He felt his consciousness expanding. He could feel the moisture in the soil 300 feet away. He could feel the vibrations of a beetle crawling on a leaf in the upper canopy. He could feel the heartbeat of the island. His last human thought was of old man Bakari. "You were wrong," he tried to think. "It didn't eat me. I am becoming everything." Then the wood closed. The seam vanished. The bark knitted itself back together with the precision of a master surgeon. The next morning, the road crew arrived to find the site abandoned. Salim's expensive truck sat with its doors open, the battery dead. His axe lay at the foot of the witness, its iron head rusted as if it had been sitting in salt water for 50 years. The X was gone. There was no sign that the bark had ever been breached. But high up on the trunk, in a place where the wood had been smooth the day before,
a new knot had formed. It was a perfect, life-sized carving of a human face. The eyes were closed, the expression one of terrifying stony peace. The Grand Comore Development Initiative collapsed within a month. Without Salim's drive and his specific engineering plans, the investors pulled out. The equipment was left to rust in the humidity, becoming trellises for vines and nesting sites for birds. Old Man Bakari visited the tree one final time before he passed away. He brought no axe, only a small bowl of goat's milk and a prayer. He looked up at the new face on the trunk and nodded. "You wanted to be the spine of the island, Salim. Now you are. You will watch the vanilla grow. You will see the children play. You will see the clouds touch the volcano for 1,000 years. I hope you find the view worth the price." Today, the witness still stands at the edge of the Mitsamiouli forest. It is the tallest tree in the archipelago, its canopy so wide it creates its own microclimate. Local guides will take you near it, but they will not let you touch the bark. They say that if you press your ear against the gray wood when the moon is full, you won't hear the wind. You will hear the sound of a man's voice, muffled by centuries of growth, calculating the distance to a horizon he will never reach. The forest has reclaimed the path, the asphalt never came, and the Vandru continue their long, silent watch, ensured that the contract between the people and the earth remains signed in the living wood of the witness. Years later, travelers still speak of the staring tree of the Comoros. Some say it is a natural phenomenon, a trick of light and shadow on the irregular bark of a baobab. Others, those who have spent too long in the deep silence of the Karthala slopes, know better. They know that nature does not forgive, it only reincorporates. Salim's dream of a road was realized in a way. The birds use the branches he became to travel from the sea to the mountain. The ants use his fiber to build their empires. He is the infrastructure he always wanted to build, not of cold, dead concrete, but of living, breathing memory. And sometimes, when the tropical storms lash the island and the lightning illuminates the grove, the face on the tree seems to open its eyes, not in anger, but in the slow, agonizing realization that while man's time is measured in hours, the witness measures time in heartbeats of the earth, and the earth is never in a hurry.
That's all for today. If you liked the video, let me know by hitting like. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe for more. You can watch another video of mine right here. See you next time.